Guys, welcome to SaaSBoomi. We are currently in Dubai. We are at Ankit's residence, and Ankit has done a great job at building an amazing SaaS company, and he recently sold it to a larger corporation in Japan. We'll talk more about it. I'm Dhruvil, if I can call you your host and dost. And of course, we have Shruti as well, who is another great founder from Dubai. She officially introduced herself in her own words. We are going to make it super fun. We are going to talk about a lot of interesting stuff. The focus is going to be on GCC market. We know that there's always been a lot of assumption, myths behind this region. It's one of the best regions to sell software in. It's one of the best regions to be based out of. And today we want to kind of make sure that we bring a lot of our experiences to the audience so that the India-based SaaS founders can take the best decisions as they decide to scale their business in Gulf and Middle East. So over to both of you, not over to one of us on that front. Shruti, why don't you introduce yourself and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, so I started a SaaS company called Wingman 5 years back. Like Ankit, I also sold it last year to a company in the Silicon Valley called Larry. And now I'm based in Dubai. And I think the three of us have had different styles of exposure to the GCC market. So, I'm going to largely be the one asking questions. And Ankit and Dhruvil will be the experts here answering based on their experiences. Are you guys ready?
Perfect. We are. And I'm Ankit. I started a company called AdPushUp about 9 years ago, which I sold off this year to a SoftBank subsidiary called Genie. I've been here in Dubai since the last almost 2.5 years. Wow, time flies. Figured out the moving playbook, we will talk shortly about the benefits of moving to this market and to sell to this market, and also from a founder perspective, how it is more, convenient, how it helps in terms of various regions, logistics, and, a good base to be based out of. But yeah, let's get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think the first question that everybody has on their mind when they think about this market, right? Everybody understands the logic behind US, right? It's the largest software market. People, of course, being based in India, you do sometimes use that as your test market or as the entry point for most companies. Of course, nowadays we have some companies that are entirely, using India also as a big market for themselves. Where do you place, UAE and Middle East more broadly in that pecking order, right? What's kind of even the logic behind thinking of this market? Is it, the size of it? Is it the connectivity?
So I think this is a very unique market in the sense where the consumer sentiment is more similar to the Western markets, but the B2B culture and decision-making process is closer to home in India, right? So this gives us that unique flavor. And if I were to, if you are anyway building a product, right, for the Indian market or the US market, right, I would say they are two completely different markets in terms of decision-making, in terms of, especially if you're selling to enterprises. Of course, the way SMB works is a little bit more homogeneous, but in terms of enterprises, the product needs, the decision-making process, how the culture of decision-making is, you can see some stark differences between, developing countries, South Asia versus the Western world. But I would put it that, this GCC market is still a lot more closer to India and South Asia in developing markets, and probably a great stepping stone as well when people are heading out or moving towards the Western markets.
I think for us, we started in 2015, and all my personal experience of selling and consulting was in US. So we had no idea about how even India works or how Middle East works. I remember in 2016 we had raised a little bit of money, so we had some little bit of a press and a brand around us, at least in the local vicinity of be it Mumbai or India. But one thing that happened to us, and which still happens to most Indian SaaS founders, is that when you have some presence, even the basic one, right, in India with, let's say, 5 customers or 20 team members, and a little bit of money raised or some good early traction, you somehow get noticed in Middle East as well. So our first lead actually came in early 2017. It was inbound. It was a large corporation in UAE who was trying to start a delivery company within themselves. It was more of a startup culture there within a large corporation. So it was much easier for them to take quicker decisions. And they were willing to partner with new age tech firms, which usually, at least at that point in time, was one of the biggest showstoppers or friction point that you face as an early company, whether an enterprise would truly trust you or not and stuff like that. So it was very organic for us, and we had no plan that we will establish ourselves in GCC and whatnot. And we had just thought that we'll do India and then probably we'll go to US. And that time UAE proved out to be, and this region proved out to be a very good stepping stone towards maturity. So I would not call that it was a playground for us or a learning ground, but it was a stepping stone towards understanding how to sell to larger organizations, how to sell to companies which are already partially digitized. Unlike Indian enterprises, you would see probably more tech adoption already done, especially in Dubai companies, if not other parts in GCC.
And to your point, right, one thing which I also agree with is that a lot of decision makers which are sitting in the GCC region might have been taken from India. Yeah, so that's also a great way because they've noticed you in the Indian market, the decision makers are similar, etc. It also gives you a lot of visibility.
I think that was true because, and this is something till date I've seen, that roughly 50% of the decision makers that is in the companies that we sell to are from Indian origin, right? And I think that also makes it very, very comforting because they already trust you in some way and you have this, not too much of a cultural misfit. At the same time, you also learn that fundamentally all cultures are pretty much the same, right? Usually if you don't have that selling experience, you have this notion in your mind that if you have to sell in Japan, you have to do something Japanese. If you have to sell in Saudi, you have to do something Arabic, or in Western market something English, right? But that's not really the case. 90% of the stuff is pretty much the same. You're dealing with people and how you understand their decision-making process, understand the stakeholders, that's in change management, right? That's what fundamentally. So I think that was very helpful. And then I think, and the best part was that since it was inbound lead and it was a startup within a large company, we got a sizable deal very quickly. So that decision-making process was only like 30, 45 days because their business itself was very small at that point in time. That was good. It also proved to be a good expansion journey for us because then their business grew very quickly. So we grew with them. At the same time, the biggest thing that happens in, when you come to GCC, I think which is the biggest, in my opinion, the best reason why a founder from India should come to GCC as soon as possible is because you get that, you come out of the backlog of suppressed ARPU and pricing to a better, some sort of a better world when it comes to pricing.
Yeah.
So we saw that, we had a better pricing, more steeper pricing, better for us, for the customer. And they were very appreciative of it.
Yeah.
Does not mean that they did not negotiate. They do negotiate. They have their own contracting process and all of it. But it was reasonable. It was a win-win situation.
We'll come to pricing just in a bit. Actually, our experience was a little bit different. And we, in fact, had one of our seed investors was based in the Middle East. And, one of their selling points to us was that they will help us come to the region. But what we realized was from a sales tech perspective and specific to what we were building, right, it wasn't a good fit for the market because the way the sales process works here, and especially pre-pandemic, it used to be a lot more in-person meetings. So, our technology wasn't a great fit. And also in general, technology adoption, especially in the sales space, here is much lower, right? So even when people think about like Salesforce as a market in the region and like things on top of it, it's been, much more of a laggard market in that sense. And it's been led largely by the public sector. And, maybe we'll talk a little bit more also about what are the different types of sectors. And maybe we can talk about that now, right? Like, what are the different types of sectors? Are there different types of, you mentioned mid-market enterprise, I'm saying public versus private. Then there are the different industries, right? Like there's real estate versus like sales tech. What is kind of your pick on saying, hey, if you're doing A, B, and C, then you should sell into this market. If you're not, if you're doing X, Y, Z, then definitely stay away from.
Yeah. So my understanding here is there are certain sectors which are doing really well, or at least as part of their GDP or their economy, right? Of course, real estate is one of them, banking is one of them, retail is one of them, right? So these sectors are basically concentrating or dominating the economy, right? So if you're selling to them, when I say real estate, the infrastructure bulk altogether, right? If you're selling to the infrastructure companies or anybody involved in the whole supply chain of real estate or retail, including the supply chain for that as well, banking, this is a great market, right? However, if you go to slightly, more traditional sectors outside that, I think that's where I think it's not as diversified, or even tourism for that. Of course, tourism, right? Anything associated with tourism, right? Hospitality, hotels, that's also huge. But if you go outside these 4 or 5 brackets or buckets, right? That's where you'll see that it's so shallow and, it's very hard to build businesses outside that it tends to become a very, very small market, right? Even something as, common as automobile, right? The automobile market that you'll see in other countries versus here. Of course, the same ARPU question, right? The average value of the car would be very high, but the market size is very small.
I think that is very true. I feel our take also has been very similar. Our vertical is supply chain and logistics. And we see that, while logistics feels everywhere, across the world. It feels like it must be a large market in general. We have our own fitment within logistics. Like we can't sell to anybody within logistics. Right? So we don't sell to a manufacturing plant. We don't sell to a steel logistics or a chemical logistics and whatnot, right? But for us, high frequency movements of goods is very important. And I think, this region, because of the population density, and I'm not talking about UAE, but also Saudi, Egypt, Turkey kind of markets, where e-commerce, when we started, was very nascent and had a very similar growth curve as India or Southeast Asia saw. And also generally, FMCG distribution, retail distribution, which is like more B2B supply chain kind of businesses. Those are also very good attractive points. I've also heard facilities management is another one which is pretty solid in this region. I've also heard if you're doing freight forwarding kind of businesses or a containerized freight and more those very hardcore industries, the UAE, Saudi can be like very interesting ones. I think banking also is a very, I've known like Mashreq Bank, the Turkish bank, right? Like I've seen every B2B finance SaaS companies, they would always have Mashreq Bank as their customer. Mm-hmm. Very progressive bank that from what I can see from outside.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think you love tech.
And they love tech, right? And I can see it also here in UAE. A lot of times when you experience, you have those, Mashreq centers and ATMs and all, you see a very solid technology backing behind them. So those I think those are the classic sectors that work really well. What doesn't work, in my opinion, is also, I think, and I would say what doesn't work, meaning I think smaller market size, is probably the dev tools kind of an ecosystem, right? Like you would ideally want to sell dev tools to an India or a US kind of territory or a little bit of a Europe in some parts of Europe where the developer concentration is higher. While still GCC builds a lot of software in-house in the region, I think it's still growing.
And one thing which we don't talk about, now that you were saying it just hit me, selling to government, right? For example, when we're selling to government, we don't think of it as something exciting, perhaps because, we're used to selling to government, maybe in India or our experience. But one thing I noticed there, and it starts from the day you arrive here, you notice everything is so digital. The government is so progressive in terms of investing into technology that if you really have some key value to add to the market, to the government, to the setup here, it's not so difficult to set up meetings with the decision makers and they would be very fast moving. And again, it starts all the way from immigration, where my whole immigration process took 2 or 3 days and it was pretty multiple apps involved. It was all digital, there was no queuing or waiting, following up, everything was sorted.
And I think this is really different from both India and the US, right? Like I would say US public sector is also very, very hard, right?
Yeah.
Even behind India. Yeah, even behind India for some of these specificities, right?
I think to that extent, in many cases, the public sector here can be the biggest buyer of technology, right? Across the board, right? Like we see that even, of course, in the Salesforce ecosystem and in a lot of the SAPs and those type of companies experience the same. But I think across the board, even for startups, they tend to be quite.
So why don't we share maybe one story each, right? Like I have a very short one. But in terms of how to sell to governments in UAE, like do you just kind of do a normal lead gen? Are there like events happening for it? Do you run ads? To the classic channels, right? But I'm sure you guys know better in terms of the B2G process in the region. Like we have, I remember in 2018, when we had like a few customers in UAE, we had gotten a reach out from the government only, and there's a department, I'm missing the name, which was running an accelerator program. Mm-hmm. And they were really accelerating or incubating the companies from outside UAE to really have a base in UAE. And they had like 8, I don't know,
what they did, DIFC, which is Dubai program, and then Dubai International Finance Center, I think that's what they are called. They have an incubation center. Then Abu Dhabi has put up Hub 71.
This was actually even one more. I think that's the best part about this whole, there's an ecosystem available. So if you start selling in UAE, you will naturally get attracted. You will probably get inbounds from these, programs also, which probably even we are not able to recollect right now.
Silicon Oasis also has one. Silicon Oasis also, where they have a accelerator program for startups.
And ours was designed in a way where there were 8 options. You can actually apply for different government entities. Like you can apply to this DIVA, right? If you have a utility kind of a product. Or like we had applied for, of course, the Emirates Post is not entirely government, but that was one of the options. And there was one more, which was the municipality part of it, which would go and collect waste. Now, waste management was not a use case we ever thought of. We actually built that use case with them, and UAE has a very efficient waste management process, which you can't even you don't even see it outside. Right? You think it's just happening on its own, but the solid backbone that is, and they optimized that also from a routing perspective and whatnot. Then we got one more inbound from a channel partner in Saudi, which was about Saudi Post, and entirely government nationalized post. very bureaucratic and traditional way of working, but they were revamping and going for digital transformation. And I truly saw that when these guys say digital transformation, they truly mean it. Like I've used this word being abused outside this region, but these guys like truly do it. So happy to learn from your experience.
The great part, since we're talking about accelerators, right? I think one of the great parts is it does not mean if you've already created a business in the US or in India that you have to change your holding structure or something like that. In a lot of these cases with these accelerators, as long as you're incorporating, even if it's a subsidiary here, I think that's enough. Right? So they're not looking for any equity. They're looking for more businesses to come and work out of this environment and give you all the resources. So this is like very co-entrepreneur of the startup, right? Where their true north, their true KPI alignment is actually making you successful, right? So you bring more of your business there. So all this help and support is without expecting any equity in return and a host of benefits that they provide you, right? In our case, our experience, while we've sold to businesses here, we've sold to a few media companies here, which are very fast-moving processes. These are large enterprises, right? But when it comes to the government, right, I've experienced this and I've seen this across with 2 or 3 other startups, senior people from the industry where they would connect. But I've seen most of these, deals moving through introductions. And people are, when we say introductions, it's not so difficult. You reach out to the right people in the industry, might find the right connect, especially if the government is so tightly coupled and connected, from one department to the other. As long as you're able to articulate and put forward something which will benefit them and has a clear KPI, it's extremely easy to sing meetings directly, right?
I think in a nutshell, if I had to just add one line to it, is that government here runs like a corporation.
100%.
So it is no different. In UAE and nearing nations, selling to governments is exactly doing B2B.
Enterprise things, 100%.
I think, one thing that I've seen closely in this region is that especially Saudi has been one of the biggest customers of consulting projects, right? So much so that they have special flights on Fridays and on Mondays and Thursdays going from Dubai to Saudi. Just to the point of how big of a corporation the government and the government operatives think of themselves as, right? So it's very professionally run in that sense.
That is true.
Of course, culturally, that trust is a big factor. So, I've also seen and heard a lot of stories of, it's not just about the introduction, but who introduced you, right? Like, kiske vaste? And that word vaste is a very common word that is used, especially in the Saudi region, for, what is the channel through which you came? Yeah, so I think some lessons there that one, don't shy away from, selling to the government, make use of the programs that exist. And I think lots of startups have gone through that experience, right? Like right from Oyo being a big beneficiary of the fact that HubSub 71 existed and they wanted to bring in founders, and Oyo was actually the one housing all of those founders. Right. So I think a lot of companies have benefited from it. And therefore, what has also happened is that the government views a lot of the Indian startups very positively. In fact, so many of the sovereign funds where they have almost 70-80% exposure in just Indian startups, right? While they're based here in this region.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, a lot of what we spoke about is about UAE, right? Like, what about, when you think about Middle East, right? What are kind of the bigger markets? How do you put them in the pecking order based on maybe the different sectors that you're selling to? And is UAE kind of the center of the universe, or is it elsewhere?
I don't think it depends, of course, which industry or, what sort of segment are you selling to. But I think if you would just look at, a good way to see is by the GDP of the markets, right? If you see, and also I think how they're thinking about it now, I would say that Saudi is actually a bigger market, while UAE as a market is very concentrated. The ARPU will be much higher. The paying capacity could be great. And it's very tightly coupled or knit so that, once you create one success, it's so easy to, get to the other similar players. So your GTN can be much more faster, but you will exhaust out of it much faster compared to the bigger options. And, for example, in our case, we started with Dubai because generally what happens is the whole GCC region looks up to case studies in Dubai. But in our case, there were only 3 enterprise accounts that we could go after. So you can see how small the market was, right? Whereas with those 3 examples, our potential in the rest of the market was maybe 50 times larger.
It's a new interpretation of land and experience.
Yeah. I think this is a very important thought for everyone, that when you go to a new market, one of the things that you should do is largely a bottom-up analysis and not a top-down analysis. If you just kind of go and find research papers around market size of GCC, and then there's a whole, like we also have a case study in Harvard around us on how we launched in GCC, by the way. That's a old reminder to myself. But that's like, you always say like large numbers, but that may not be your number necessarily. To find your true number of market size, you must make a list of all the potential enterprise clients, or even for mid-market or lower mid-market, make that entire universe. Extremely important to get your own clarity in terms of, should you be first doing UAE or doing Saudi, or should you go to Egypt first or Turkey first, or if you go and sell in Israel, right? I think it's very, very important. We had not done that, and we had a very similar story as well, right? So we started in 2017 to sell in UAE. By 2020, we had almost roughly, I think 15% of our revenue was coming from UAE, because we were selling elsewhere also, and we were very happy about it, and very high gross margin, high ARPU business, and happy customers and whatnot. Fast forward 2023, after we launched Saudi and Egypt, today 20% of the revenue comes from Saudi and Egypt combined, which is 15 and 5, and roughly only like 3% revenue comes from UAE. Not that it has not grown, but the other markets in Gulf region have grown faster for us, purely because of the sheer number of companies and the size of companies also. Sometimes for a business like e-commerce transportation, like for example, there are larger e-commerce companies in Saudi by size and by number of orders than there are in UAE, right? Because the sheer population is like almost 10x or whatnot. So that's one thing to kind of note.
And also because how the Saudi government is now trying to ensure that all the money outflow that would happen, whether it is for services, products, etc., they're trying to curtail and keep it inside. So they're actually creating so many incentives, right? So I think that's also one factor which you can probably, use to decide which market to go after. Because a lot of countries here are actually giving incentives for startups and companies to come over.
Yeah.
So that could also be one variable that you can add in your decision making.
Sounds like UAE is a good land and expand strategy, because it's generally a market that everybody looks at through. So if you get a couple of logos, easier to build trust with the rest of the region. I think too is just in terms of maybe the diversity of the talent pool available here, right? Like you can probably get a person who is Egyptian and a person who's Turkish and a person who's Saudi, all in this particular.
Also European actually, which we didn't talk about, but we run all of our Europe sales GTM also from Dubai.
And that's actually a great, and I've seen that happening a lot. We actually are contemplating. So we have a similar thing. So currently our Europe gets served by Americas. So our New York office does LATAM, US, like North America and Europe. But we're thinking that we'll just move the Europe one closer to EMEA, because first of all, the language barrier is like huge, right? And most Americans, they speak Spanish. So LATAM is like super easy. And also time zone wise, the same time zone, US and LATAM. But Europe also is a different time zone. Plus it wakes up sunny, right? So you also have to kind of match that time zone. Plus, you have to also match with India, because the back office is in India, right? So that becomes tricky. And I think like barring UK, the rest of the Europe can very well better be served from UAE. Great talent available, most likely might be from Europe itself. So they would love to kind of sell it back to their home country.
So we have people who are French speakers, Polish speakers. In fact, the reason why it's even more important is, for the large European markets, maybe let's say Germany or UK, you can still afford to have an office there. But you have a lot of these small markets, Croatia, Poland, etc., which do not justify the ROI for putting an office there. So we're able to club all of these smaller markets together and have.
I think can I double down on that by saying that if I have to suggest somebody, I would recommend not having anybody hired in Europe. It's a different one more variable you're into your business, because having a global business and global offices sound very cool, but it's very, very difficult.
The work culture.
Biggest is work culture, right? Like
and then the labor laws.
Laws council. Yeah. And it's not worth it. Like there's just extra overhead when you can get the same for a better price in UAE.
And there are more, call it capitalism, call it the Dubai culture. The drive which you see for people who have moved here is, at least my limited view or whatever I have experienced, is much higher compared to people sitting there.
Then you get to keep 100% of the money you earn. Also,
you're not working for the government. That's a great point.
Very, very interesting point. But is what?
That's probably the reason. If you take the Scandinavians and put them in UAE, they'll probably work twice and.
Also because maybe they're working towards buying their first Lamborghini. Right?
One more, we should talk about the blink part on. But I think one more thing that I thought I have, which is also largely undervalued actually in my opinion, is the location proximity with India and kind of being able to transit through Dubai very easily, right? And having an office in UAE basically helps you not have too many remote employees. By the way, the number of companies I'm hearing who are moving back to full time office and leaving, I don't know what's your
Right. So
oh wow, I didn't know about it. Yeah, yes, announced today. By the way, like full 5 days back. It was a big news.
I think a month ago, Zoom moved back to office.
It was crazy, right? Because that learning from osmosis is extremely important, especially for our sales and account management teams, because there is no concrete skill set they're gonna come with, right? They will know how to talk to people, how to negotiate, how to build relationships, but your way of selling and managing clients has some uniqueness which even as a founder you want people to write a playbook on or explain, and you cannot just go and spend time with every salesperson in every region. It will feel like very cool traveling across the board, but in 1 year you will get exhausted, right? And having these people co-located in UAE can be very magical, because you can have a couple of old or senior folks also who can just keep training more and more people. So even if they're not the most best sales people or account managers, they can be very good at running sales enablement. For us right now, at least for last couple of years, couple of our oldest employees actually have turned into sales enablers only, and they don't really run quota anymore, because our quotas kept on getting increased, and beyond the point, some of the sales guys don't prefer to sell anymore, right? So they moved to that roles. And within one office, it works out really, really well. And as a founder, you can do India, US travel, India, Europe travel. You can always transit to Dubai super easily. Spend time with your team, meet some customers, go back to India, meet your India team. It can be a very sustainable way of leading a global business.
And if you go past that 200 million revenue mark, then people who you've put together and, probably well seasoned by that time can actually go off start, this business in their region as well.
Yeah.
So, kind of thinking about that, right? Like, when should you start, right? Like, of course, when you're $200 million, there are lots of options.
Yeah.
But when should you start thinking about the Middle East region? Right? Is it something like, in your case, happened organically? Was there a resistance? Do you think it was too early? Just curious to hear what personal stories and all.
I think I have a simpler view, and I don't know if yours will match or not, but I think I would very, very highly recommend any India-based founder, SaaS founder, to launch UAE, or you don't need to really launch, but like do UAE and GCC as quickly as you can. You don't need to, I've heard this thing that, do I need like a product market fit before I come here? No, I don't think you need that. But of course, you need to have a decent product built before you can go and showcase to any customer. But that is true for the whole world. The best part is, again, like, once you get used to this more matured, digitized organization paying you a fair price, having those enterprise contracts, your confidence level increases. You can reinvest that, even if you're not funded, you can reinvest that into your product building, and kind of, it will come. I think your growth will happen faster in this region when trying to versus trying to stick to only India. And the biggest part is that it doesn't cost much. For as low as 50K in first 12 months, you can launch UAE. You can do maybe one or two small events with a small booth. You can, have a couple of people who can do outbound from India. You can yourself travel, I don't know, 6 times a year in Dubai for, as low as like $6,000-7,000 a year total across the year. So with a very thrifty spending habit, like as low as 50K, of course, more the better. You can have this region activated, and, in 12 months, you can expect to have like between 3 and 10 enterprise customers, depending on your ticket size. And that's a great ROI. Like, your CAC payback is done in first 12 months itself, and what better can that be for a early stage business?
So my view about this is very similar, as you said, and the way I like to think about it is that the best place to sell in India is Dubai. So the market is actually very similar, barring maybe some GTM motions, etc. The product market fit in most industries is going to be very, very similar, minus maybe some specific integrations, whether that is banking, etc. So agree with you 100%. If you feel you're comfortable and ready to sell to a certain segment in India, I don't see a reason why you should not be selling in Dubai as well, or you to begin with, and then expand.
So I'd like to challenge you a little bit on that, Dhruvil, right? Like you said, even if you're early in the product cycle, right? Like you haven't gotten the product market fit. And I know a lot of times we suggest founders go to the US market if that is kind of your ultimate goal, go there, because otherwise the feedback you get will be inaccurate, it will be a mismatch. So do you think that maybe coming too early to the Middle East market can be a bit of a distraction, because the feedback you get might be different, because the work culture and the other cultural aspects might be different?
At a global level, US is the Makkah of software. Like if anybody is selling you for any kind of software.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. No pun intended. I think at a global level, if you are selling any software, B2C or B2B, SaaS, non-SaaS, anything, US is at least the 50% of software market of any software whatsoever, right? And probably other 20-25% is China, which is inaccessible to the world, and 25% is rest of the world. Look at any big business, India-based, US-based, consumer tech, business tech, look at their financials at scale. And when I say scale, at even after 150 $200 billion of revenue, with probably pre-IPO or after IPO, the financials are available. The geographical split may not be available, but if you go deeper into it, you'll always find at least 50% revenue coming from the US. So yes, if US is your is the game you want to play, I would highly recommend kind of you go there first. But that's what I think. At the same time, when you do US, in today's world, you can't ignore rest of the world, right? So you will be doing rest of the world anyways. And I think that's when the call comes, whether you are a bootstrap founder or you have some extended runway. If you have an extended runway, you can probably spend a little bit extra time in UAE, because no matter how much you do US, you will be coming back to India, right? So UAE can be like a good, UAE is basically extended India, like I don't know about it better out of India, but
best place to sell in India
is the best place, as you said, right? That's the best way of putting it forward. So.
But to that point, I also agree that look, if you're file or most of the largest market is for you is in the US, go and sell there, right? But if you're already selling in India, that's when it's a no-brainer to sell in the UAE or the GCC market, because in most of these sectors it behaves in the same way.
How about this one? If we put it this way, just maybe spinning it around a little bit. Everybody knows you have to sell in US at some point, right? Even if you do great in India, UAE, you will be selling in US. But if you are not confident about selling in US, if you don't have the time and resources to sell it in the US yet, then UAE should be the first stepping stone for you.
I know one of the things that you mentioned was you can start very early. You can come here with maybe a $50,000 investment, right? But what about localization or changing the product? How much does that need to be different for this region?
I'll take first. I think, so for us, we had to change, this was the first region we did outside of India. So we had to change our language first of all. Then you have to introduce time zones. And the third was currency. So you have to make your platform language agnostic, time zone agnostic, and currency agnostic, which is an architectural change, doesn't cost too much. It is, I think, at our scale, like we were in the second year of our business, it took us 2.5 months of effort for an engineering team of 10-15 people, which was very expensive at that time. But that was the change. Otherwise, the integrations, we always had this thing that integrations were a part of the CAC process, right? So if you're acquiring a customer, it would be a part of the deal only that we would integrate one software for free or 3 for free, depending on how big the ARR of the customer is and how much of a lock-in they are offering, what kind of payment terms they are offering, how serious they are about signing up if we actually do this right now, things like that. Later on, integrations became a part of our sales process only, where we would only do it if you sign the deal first. We will commit to you in the next 3 months, whatever, as you go, right? So I think these are the 4 things that we did. I have seen largely this is the principle that applies for any other non-India launch that you do. Another thing that I've seen is the data residency part, which is the multi-geography or multi-region implementation of the cloud. So in countries like Saudi especially, and UAE is like much more friendlier on global cloud hosting, but countries like Saudi would push you to host the data of the customer or host your software locally. There are actual laws around it as well. Everybody knows about GDPR, but GDPR is largely about seeking consent if you are taking the data outside European Union. Some of the Saudi laws are designed around even keeping the data only inside Saudi, and you just cannot take them outside. So when you have to adhere to those data processing addendums as a part of your enterprise contracts, and it becomes a little tricky. So I think multi-geography and multi-region implementation is something that I would recommend a lot of new age founders to do it, especially if you're starting a company in 2022 or 2023. Multi-geography or multi-region implementation on AWS or Azure or GCP should be a part of your initial roadmap. The sooner you do it, the easier the changes. Even for multi-language, multi-currency and multi-time zone, the sooner you do it, the easier it is, because otherwise you have to change all your tables and all your screens and all the modules have to go through that change. So the sooner you do the better.
So it's best to factor this in the architecture from day one. In our case was quite different from the since we are in the media space, we didn't really have to do anything. The integrations which we have with other supply platforms or ad servers like Google, etc. They are exactly the same. In terms of currency, the market works still on dollars, at least in our space, so there's no problem with that. I think unless you're selling to something which is the endpoints are connected to the consumer, Arabic becomes a very non-negotiable integration in terms of support. But at least in our space, we really had to make zero changes to be able to sell to this market.
What was your experience, Shruti, on this?
So for us, what we see is that we don't need to make any changes other than maybe language support as and when needed. But again, in a lot of B2B context, business does happen in the English language in the region, especially I think in UAE for sure, because and just for context for everyone here, right? Like the population of this country is around 10 million people, and 90% of it roughly is immigrants. So it's basically a lot of international people here, and therefore English lands up being the common.
I think it depends on the use case largely, because after I heard both of you, because we have two kinds of users. One are operations and dispatch managers who are sitting in the warehouse or a store or a sortation center. Another are drivers. And both are largely low-wage workers who are immigrants themselves, but they may not really be speaking the local language. And Arabic translation is actually a little bit of a pain from the architecture point of view because it goes
right
to bike test.
Okay, so let's get to maybe the tactical stuff, right? Should you set up a company here? Should you consider moving here as a founder? What should you hire employees here?
I mean, to be honest, all of that is very, very personal to the market, the business, contextual to the strategy that you have. In terms of having a company here, I think that is extremely important. In most businesses, if you're selling to enterprises locally, in the SMB space, you can still get away with it. You can still use maybe your global headquarters wherever they are, to be able to work with companies here. There are no strong restrictions in terms of, capital control or the currency controls where, local companies have challenges paying outside. I don't think that's a challenge here, unlike India.
Intended currency is also pegged to the English dollar. In that sense, it's quite stable. And is there a difference in terms of, there are free, being mainland versus in the free zones, those type of things?
Absolutely. And
there's one answer to this.
No, I've evaluated this not only from our business perspective, but also from a personal perspective. Look, if you're selling locally, right, and also in terms of compliances, right, if you have a lot of business here and you have employees here and you need a good presence, I think it might be better to set up a mainland company than a free zone company. If your work predominantly just involves to create or, an entity here which can service customers here in terms of, the billing, etc., but your team is setting outside the market, then a free zone company is also okay. Or maybe if you're using this as, a global headquarters for whatever your stack structure or your org structure plan is. So it depends on that. But if you have a sizable base of customers locally in the market, it's actually worthwhile to set up your GCC headquarters here. And then depending upon each subsequent market, you might have a subsidiary there.
We have not set up a UAE entity and we never had a need to set up one local entity in GCC. But I see that, if you have one early on, it's more friendlier to the customers. They're more comfortable, especially the enterprise one, if you have a local entity here. But without that, we have been running it for last more than 5 years now in this region from the scratch. And we literally never had a single need from an employment perspective or forex perspective or any compliance perspective. We have never had a need to be based out of here. You can hire people in UAE by getting a PEO, which is called Professional Employment Organization, which are local partners whose formal job is to hire local or immigrants for foreign countries, right? So you can also move your India people to UAE if there is a need. You can hire people who are local to UAE, or you can hire people from other companies who are immigrants, but they want to move from that company to your company in a fully legal, very easy way. There are companies you can find which cost you between 3% to 10% of the salary, and then they would hire people for you, and they are basically making out things via. Having a subsidiary becomes a little bit trickier in terms of your overhead, right? Because then you have to consolidate that revenue into your parent. You also have to kind of, doing the transfer pricing locally as well. And now there is also, VAT and even the income tax for companies are being introduced. Is it already introduced? It's already introduced right now. So So things are changing from a company perspective. And I think if you still decide, from my high level research, and Ankit definitely knows much better on that, is I think between Mainland and Free Zone, I think Free Zone is more preferred for software companies. For asset-led companies, Free Zone is preferred. If you have manufacturing, port operations kind of businesses, then a Mainland
comes better. The only thing I would probably add to it is the forward-looking view on this servicing from outside or billing from outside. That's changing because now that they've introduced taxes just 2-3 months ago, with the corporate tax coming in, now they're trying to look at companies and, they're basically going into, which I've noticed, I've heard a few times, going into, sharing offices, co-working spaces, trying to find out people, the employee base here without an entity. So the forward-looking statement on such matters is now in the future, the government would like anybody selling here to be incorporated here, because now there is an incentive for them, which is the tax which they derive when somebody's
Interesting.
And can you also talk a little bit about hiring people here and also maybe like relocating people here, right? Like a lot of times you might have your team in India and, you already have the person, you already have the trust in that person. How easy is it to hire and also to relocate?
Look, in my case, I can tell you that when I did not have a company here, so let me compare it to the US. We had a US headquartered incorporation in a Delaware C Corp, right? And it took me 6.5 months to get an L1 visa. For me to move here without having any legal entity here was a 3-day job. And I'm talking about this, even like summer 21, which is like peak COVID period, right? So in terms of, while it may sound like, visa process and everything, moving, relocating somebody here, it is an absolutely simple and straightforward process. You can actually do that. You can arrive here as a tourist as well, get your work started and find that application in process when it continues. Very straightforward, very digital. If you're hiring somebody locally, then of course that's not a problem at all. Finding people, you have, it's again very similar. You have a lot of job boards, you have a lot of consultants, and in a very similar way how you'll hire, let's say, in other markets like India. But it can be expensive. You may not initially, want to understand, how much to budget for it. Generally, it could be 5,000 to 10,000 dirhams initially, which you're investing into, the person that you're hiring for all of these operational aspects and relocation, etc. But the process is very simple.
I think on the hiring side, my take is that, first of all, very similar views as Ankit. Just to add to that, I think if I have to put a number on the cost, UAE hiring is at least twice as expensive than India, at least. Right? And then depends on the kind of people you're looking for, number one. Number two, hiring is the same playbook as India or US, no difference. Naukri Gulf is a very good platform to begin with. I'm sure all of you are aware of Naukri.com in India. They have this Gulf version of it. They sell that from India itself, so you can get a license done. You get some job openings, you get access to their database. Go there, understand what the, what kind of people are there and what the skill sets are. Agencies, unfortunately, haven't worked out very well for us because we actually got ripped off by a couple of them because they basically showed us like they oversold some candidates to us and we ended up kind of, being gullible enough to hire them and then, they were not as advertised, right, kind of people. And I think you also want to make sure that you hire people who are living closer to your office, if at all you're looking to have a co-working space in UAE. So that because, like sometimes people would not want to travel a lot to come to your office or commute a lot to come to your office every day. Also, selection between Abu Dhabi and Dubai also can be an interesting one that you should pick depending on where you want to hire people. I think hiring from Abu Dhabi is easier relatively.
So I would just, in our case, what we saw was, since we were majority cases, we were relocating people because we are putting this as a base for even Europe and Middle East. So we would pick people, let's say, for example, Poland is a market who are already in our space in Poland, but they want to relocate to Dubai. For us, Dubai was actually a better option to relocate them to. I think Abu Dhabi is a great place, especially if you are selling to the government. If you have any B2G motion, Abu Dhabi is actually a more preferred option.
And one general recommendation, before hitting $1 million ARR from that region outside India, do not hire anybody anywhere outside India. I think it's always, I've seen this is like general recipe for disaster. Again, if you haven't hit roughly $1 million of revenue from outside India, do not go and hire anybody. You can always travel there. Usually that first $1 million revenue from any region is a founder-led sales. You will have to understand all these nuances yourself, no matter how much, understanding you get or knowledge you get from sources like this.
And if you're much larger, then you can actually pick your key people from an existing market, such as South organization, and also
much more easier, because usually your existing markets people would be more, excited to kind of try something new. And plus they will of course know everything that works for you and doesn't work for you. So they will not have a from the scratch learning cycle. Hiring a very senior person in such markets like this where you yourself are new becomes tricky, because then often, more often than not, they end up, governing the terms and ways and strategies of your business in that region. And a lot of times, like 90% of the times, those strategies may not really work for you, because you may have to have your custom GTM playbook developed.
They'll bring their own playbooks, which in most cases are not compatible.
So actually, let's get into the GTM playbooks, right? I've hired people or not hired people, but I've decided that I want to sell into this market, right? Maybe I've done the initial validation. Now, how do I actually go and, find the right set of customers? Is it, depending on the cultural context, sometimes these things can be different, but, broadly speaking, in the US, people believe that if you're selling to mid-market enterprise, a lot of it is events plus outbound motion. If you're selling to SMB, it's probably a lot more, SEO and inbound driven. Does the same thing apply? Is there something different? Do channel partners play a bigger role here? Ankit?
Yeah, 100%. I think channel partners, because this is in the enterprise space, it is a very, very relationship-driven market, more so again in the government, which means channel partners can actually be a very good, or rather a very faster GTM motion for you. Because if you have, the only challenge I would say with partners is, of course, if let's say you're under $1 million, right, in your key market or main market, channel partners may not find it as exciting. Generally, channel partners would like to bring it in the same way as like how a franchisee works, where you have already proven market, you have sizable customers there, you're way past product market fit. They are very keen to invest their time because, there's sizable social proof, there is sizable, commercials established, etc. So channel partners absolutely go for it, depending upon, if the case, whether that you establish one market as core. Otherwise, you might not see as much interest from them. So if you're just establishing your business under 1 million ARR and want to enter this market, it might be difficult to get channel partners. So you might have to run the GTM yourself. But if that is not the case, channel partners are a great way to get a very fast sales cycle and expand in the market much more faster, predominantly because it is relationship driven in the enterprise.
I fully agree. Our experience has been very similar. Offline go-to-market motions work better than the digital inbound or online ones. Primarily is because very relationship driven market, very top down in terms of decision making as well. So you can it's very difficult to get your way out by selling to the bottom and trying to, ultimately close a large deal. Plus there are tons of small businesses, right, which are the channel partner business, niche consulting firms, right? Like even sometimes 2 people, 10 people companies who have good 5 solid customers, enterprise customers, and they are like making their living on it. And they know everything about this business in terms of what they truly need. And they're on the hunt of solutions like this. Because one thing that the kind customer knows is that they would want technology. There's no second thought on it. And they naturally first open up to their trusted partners like these, which are very niche firms who have been supporting them. And, that's a very organic way of kind of growing. Events have worked out really well. We do a lot of events, in our space, we do more niche events. We're just talking about it, right? Like we had done GITEX in 2017. It was unfortunately the biggest waste of money for us, because we ended up getting like 400 leads, out of which not even 40 were qualified. Because in GITEX kind of shows, it is it's like South by Southwest in US. I don't know if that's like, you guys are aware of that, which is like a good big tech show, all glamour, all latest gadget, visionary technology, future stuff. But most people who show up there are like more about exploring and trying to see cool stuff. Right? They're not really buyers. So go to your own industry shows. Like even if you're in a horizontal SaaS, I'm sure there are like, HR events happening and whatnot. There are tons of niche marketing partners also who can help you set up your own events in a very affordable way. They can set up your round tables. You can set up your, kind of like half the day events, whatnot. So try for that. AdWords and performance marketing has just absolutely failed for us in this region. Just somehow doesn't work. We get tons of like very small SMB leads and like not quality ones. And what else has worked for us, what else hasn't worked for us is also pure play, like social media marketing, because outside UAE, most of the people are not on LinkedIn, which is little, I don't know what your experience is, but even in Saudi or Egypt, we don't see half the organization of our own customers also not being on LinkedIn. Or if they're on LinkedIn, they'll have like 20 connections, right? So you know that they're not active. They just kind of created some account and then they never showed up. So I think these like offline motions are better.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, bonus question for the audience. What are the 10 bling elements you can see in this video?
I think this is only for audience. We can answer. Can we answer? I like that he answer. Ankit cannot answer because it's all Ankit's bling. Of course, the first one, as you can see here, this is the first bling. This is the second bling.
Yeah.
This is the third bling. These large plants, I think, is the fourth one. Oh, how can we move to the biggest one?
This FYI, this real estate is up for sale in case something gets set up so well.
Podcast is making a separate
5% discount for everybody who's watching and watched the
5%. We should get 10%. If you give us 10%, we will flip tomorrow.
Of course, I was giving Ankit 5 points as being the bling factor. I'm only about 5 or 3 in a minute.
Thank you so much, Shruti.
So having said that, it was a very good conversation. Thanks, Ankit, for the venue. And thanks, Shruti, for taking the time out on short notice. We would also like to thank Asta from Veris and Kapil from Unicommerce, who have been instrumental in creating this GCC playbook. The whole playbook and more content will be available. And we also want to thank Sachin Bhatia from Exotel, Mrigang Tripathi from People Strong, Yash Shah from Client Joy, Ashish Tulsian from Posist, and of course, all three of us. We would like, last but not the least, we would like to thank ourselves for all the hard work that we have put together to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you.